One of my favorite attractions at Disney is Living with the Land. The idea of sending a boat through greenhouses and trying to teach guests about the future of sustainable farming seems like quite the boring concept on paper. It's really to the merit of the Imagineers who worked on designing Epcot that this attraction and many early others that defined the park became interesting and creative endeavors. However, it begs the question, if this is the future of agriculture and this attraction has been showcasing the same ideas since 1982, is this actually a realistic representation? In the book Reality Land, written by author David Koenig, he states, "Critics also found fault with the land, with its rotating space-age plants, grains raised on salt water, and tomatoes grown without soil, moving around on conveyor belts. While interesting, such techniques appeared to be wholly impractical in the age of high-yield, low-cost farming. Disney reluctantly admitted that it was putting on a show and trying to encourage discussion of possible solutions rather than showcasing actual answers for eliminating world hunger." Living with the Land, as I already stated, is one of my favorite attractions. However, today I'm interested in diving into the farming techniques showcased and seeing how viable they actually are. Are such techniques like fish farming or hydroponics really the future of our food supply? That's a question that I'm curious to explore. When Epcot opened in 1982, this attraction premiered with a slightly different name as Listen to the Land. The ride has fundamentally stayed the same since then, but there have been a few small changes. First, Listen to the Land had its boats narrated by cast members, which obviously isn't the case today. In my opinion, the current attraction is just fine with an automatic narrator. The second change was to the first scene of the ride. Called Symphony of the Seed, this scene portrays an abstract rendition of the idea of seeds taking the journey of growing into plants. It's pretty cool. The initial version of this attraction also had an original song written by Bob Moline, a favorite artist of Disney executives. Also titled Listen to the Land, this song played throughout Symphony of the Seed. You'll grow to see the sunshine on your day of birth. Let's listen to the land we all love. Nature's plan will shine. While a lot of early Epcot music was grand and inspirational, Listen to the Land was more folksy in nature, which seems to have fit the tone of the ride pretty well. The last major change to this attraction was the ending. It originally showcased a lab that has since been moved into the last greenhouse. Today, the lab that was once seen at the ending is now known as the Integrated Pest Management Lab, used for research on pest control within the greenhouses, and is something that you could potentially experience on the aptly named Behind the Seeds tour. Listen to the Land closed in 1993 and reopened in 1994 as the current iteration of Living with the Land. If you're not familiar with the premise, the boat tour aims to educate guests about agriculture and how many of its issues are being addressed today and for the future. As it starts, the original Symphony of the Seed scene is replaced with the thunderstorm. The narrator briefly talks about the importance of rain and how root systems absorb the nutrients from the soil to allow the plants to grow. Next, the boat travels into the jungle, serving as an example of the diversity of plant life and how it creates a fruitful environment for a large number of animals. As the boat continues, guests encounter the desert scene, where the narrator makes the point that despite the hostile conditions, plant life and animals still find a way to thrive in this environment. Next, guests encounter the bountiful American prairie and subsequently the American farm. To conclude this first half of the attraction, the boat enters into a barn where the evolution of farming and its technology is showcased in how it continues to address contemporary issues.
Here at Epcot, we're learning to reduce the need for chemical pesticides by breeding and using natural predators, like ladybugs and wasps, to control pests. In the farmlands across America, We're learning that by plowing under vegetation containing natural fertilizers, we can enrich the soil without the use of chemicals. In arid regions, we're learning to produce food on desert seacoasts by developing and planting crops that thrive on salt water.
The second half of the attraction is where I'm most interested in exploring though, and can be divided into 5 distinct sections. The first is the Tropics Greenhouse, which is obviously concerned with crops located in tropical regions. Next, the boat moves into an area known as the Aquacell, showcasing aquaculture or fish farming as opposed to using fishing grounds. Third, we have the Temperate Greenhouse, which is pretty self-explanatory. As we move into the fourth greenhouse, things become more interesting. Known as the String Greenhouse, this is a showcase of the vertical techniques like hydroponics used in farming. We will of course be exploring this just a little later. Finally, the boat moves into the Creative Greenhouse, where growing systems like aeroponics and aquaponics are on display. Again, we'll be exploring these and their feasibility in just a bit. The attraction concludes with a collage, showcasing various farmers around the world, and the narrator emphasizes how Epcot's agriculture program is just one part of a larger effort by the world community to continue advancing sustainable agriculture. Living with the Land is clearly focused on educating the guests of Epcot, and that's a large part of why I love this attraction. Disney wouldn't build something like this today because current leadership doesn't respect the intellectual capacity of its guests, instead opting for cheap tie-ins that sell toys. Living with the Land, while educational, is very surface level and is meant to be accessible to everyone. Is it an academic dissertation? No, and it shouldn't be. Late and prolific Imagineer Marty Sklar, who had a leading hand in designing Epcot, had this to say about the park in his book Dream It, Do It. My rule book was clear and direct. I told the Imagineers that our role was simple: create great stories, present them in unique ways, if possible, and don't worry about communicating everything you learn about a pavilion subject. Instead, make it entertaining and fun. In fact, I said, it's impossible for us to be the source of all relevant information about these subjects. So let's concentrate on creating great stories that are turn-ons, encouraging our guests to want to know more about the subjects of our shows. Living with the Land very clearly follows this design philosophy, and so in the spirit of early Epcot, I've decided to break down the farming techniques showcased in this attraction and how applicable they are to our future. First, let's talk about aquaculture, or the farming of aquatic organisms. This can include fish, crustaceans, aquatic plants, and algae. According to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, around 50% of all seafood in the United States comes from aquatic farming. Aquaculture has been a technique used for thousands of years, though it's obviously become a more prevalent technique over the last century with advancements in science and through industrial capability. Otherwise, traditional fishing has been a fundamental aspect of human history and has played an important role in many cultures and civilizations. Like all things, industrialization allowed fishing to be done more quickly and easily, but came with its own host of problems. In fact, one of our largest environmental issues today is overfishing. This really started to become a problem in the 1800s with whale fishing for oil, and overfishing of almost all commercially viable aquatic species has happened and has continued to get worse since then. Data provided by the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations show that as of 2017, around 34% of fisheries have been overfished and 60% have met maximum sustainability. This leaves only 6% of fishing grounds underfished. Essentially, seafood is really popular and has never been in greater danger of collapsing as an industry, not to mention the environmental impacts that could occur and continues to occur from such practice. Another issue with commercial fishing includes popular techniques for yielding large catches. For example, a common technique known as bottom trawling drags weighted nets behind ships on the ocean floor. It's certainly an efficient way of catching large amounts of commercial fish, but is also incredibly destructive to biodiverse coral reefs, tearing them up in the process. Bottom trawling also contains a lot of bycatch, meaning that many organisms not meant to be caught can end up dead in the net, including many endangered species such as sea turtles. This is where aquaculture comes in as a possible fix, but it's also certainly not without its own problems either. NOAA makes note that aquaculture is an effective alternative to commercial fishing, especially considering the current state of the fisheries. Their website also lists a number of benefits other than food consumption, such as rebuilding populations of endangered species, habitat restoration, wild stock enhancement, production of bait fish, and producing fish for zoos and aquariums. Aquaculture, like any industry though, comes with its own challenges and issues. For example, the Encyclopedia Britannica makes the case that aquaculture has a pretty substantial environmental impact. In East Asia, mangrove forests are often interspersed with shrimp and fish farms, not only causing habitat destruction, but the mangroves also work as natural barriers to limit the impact of events such as hurricanes and tsunamis. By removing the mangroves, those effects are felt much more dramatically on land, as the flooding of New Orleans from Hurricane Katrina in 2005 serves as a severe example. Another environmental issue of fish farms are waste products and disease. Organic waste, chemicals, and dead fish can all be flushed into nearby ecosystems, disrupting the health of local populations. Having so many fish in one place also becomes a problem for encouraging the spread of disease and pests, such as sea lice, and can also spread into local ecosystems. Obviously, aquaculture has a lot of pros and cons, and I've only explored it here at a surface level. However, I think in this case, Living with the Land's Aquacell is very much a showcase of the future of aquaculture. It's very much a real and practical solution to issues of overfishing and environmental destruction caused by commercial vessels and their fishing methods. Many issues with aquaculture also arise from a lack of regulation and mismanagement, something that will continue to be addressed in the future. Many developed countries have responsible and comprehensive regulations and penalties for noncompliance with said regulations. There are still many issues and many irresponsible actors in this industry, but considering that it's far more sustainable than commercial fishing and continues to grow in output each year, aquaculture will most definitely play a prevalent role in our future. Moving on from fish farming, let's take a look at the hydroponics of the string greenhouse. Hydroponic farming removes soil from the growing process and uses nutrient-rich water instead. For example, you can see here the nutrient film technique, in which roots are exposed to a nutrient-rich stream being pumped down an angled slope. This greenhouse also showcases other vertical techniques, which has the added benefit of allowing for the plants to be more easily checked for disease and pests. Moving into the creative greenhouse, we can see a showcase of aeroponics, which are sometimes considered a form of hydroponics. Here, hanging root systems are rotated into a structure that mists them with another nutrient-rich solution. This technique often allows plants to grow more quickly, but is also more resource-intensive. Also on display are aquaponics, in which fish farming creates nutrient-rich water in which fish waste is then absorbed by the plants. This all seems pretty straightforward, so how effective are these growing techniques? Hydroponic systems have a number of really great benefits, and one of them is that you can grow these crops anywhere. Obviously, traditional farming methods are restricted by seasons and by geographic climate. Hydroponic greenhouses clearly fix this issue. This was also represented in Epcot by the extinct attraction Horizons.
Isn't it something? Send a city kid to college for 7 years and what happens? She becomes a farmer.
Oh, I think agricultural engineer is a little more like it.
Okay, but me, I'll take the city.
Yes, it's always exciting.
But hey...
In addition to the showcase of vertical growing techniques used by a household, there was also a scene that displayed the conversion of land in the desert for farming.
Look at that, will you? A few years ago, this was all barren desert. No crops, no irrigation. Quite a transformation.
Well, I'm not surprised. I can see the storm from here. Even the robots see it. Stand by, harvesters.
It's not a hydroponic greenhouse scene, but it's definitely something that we could see today with that technology. Another benefit of hydroponics showcased in Living with the Land is that crops produce higher yields. Simply put, they spend more energy on growing rather than extending their root systems to look for more nutrients. Surprisingly, hydroponics can also be less resource intensive than traditional farming. Closed systems have less water evaporation and continue to recycle their nutrient-rich water, obviously maximizing the use of said nutrients. Another efficient method is of course aquaponics, as we already discussed, combining the waste of fish farming and converting it into a resource used in plant growth. So, what are the cons of these experimental farming methods, and why don't we see them more often? Well, I didn't know this until I did research for the video, but you can actually purchase greens grown in hydroponic systems. For example, you have companies like Gotham Greens or Green Life Farms, among many others. When purchasing these from the store, you may not even know that these were grown through hydroponic systems, but clearly the technology has reached a point where it is profitable to grow in this way. That being said, hydroponic systems have not replaced traditional farming for a number of reasons. First, the startup costs for these types of greenhouses can be quite expensive, which really limits who can get into this market. Second, the continued maintenance of these systems is also quite expensive, and while traditional farming equipment isn't cheap either, they're still more accessible. Third, because the greenhouses are so reliant on advanced technology in maintaining the correct water supplies and portions of nutrients, broken equipment, glitchy computers, and even a power outage can have a significantly negative effect on such a system. I think it's easy to see that Living with the Land is most definitely showcasing the future despite this though. Sure, these systems are expensive, but as with most technology, I anticipate that it will continue to become more affordable through time. Writer John Coetzee published an article through Forbes on November 20th, 2020, in which he highlights a new startup called Plenty. He writes about their indoor vertical farm, located in San Francisco, which is tended to by robots and AI. It produces higher yields of crops using 95% less water and does so in only 2 acres of space as opposed to the equivalent 720 of a traditional farm. It of course also uses hydroponic systems to achieve this, and its location in the city allows for fresher produce and cheaper transportation costs. For only one farm, the impressive results definitely reinforce the future of both the industry and validate the greenhouses of Living with the Land. Critics also found fault with the land, with its rotating space-age plants, grains raised on salt water, and tomatoes grown without soil, moving around on conveyor belts. While interesting, such techniques appeared to be wholly impractical in the age of high-yield, low-cost farming. Disney reluctantly admitted that it was putting on a show and trying to encourage discussion of possible solutions rather than showcasing actual answers for eliminating world hunger. Revisiting this quote, I'm not quite sure that Koenig fairly represented the practical application of the science of living with the land. For 1982, perhaps the technology on display was quite impractical, but it really feeds into what early Epcot really represented. It was meant to inspire, and while it took a few decades, we're finally seeing the technology reach a point where it most likely looks to be the future of civilization. For all the challenges of aquaculture and vertical growing methods, we're seeing a shift away from traditional fishing and farming. Imagine a future like the one Horizons tried to show us, where crops are grown directly in cities or maybe even households. This is something that we will continue to actually see develop until it becomes a normal part of everyday life. Living with the Land isn't just one of my favorite attractions because it's a relaxing experience. It's something that fulfills the lost mission of early Epcot, which is to showcase the future and get you excited for it. If you enjoy these types of video essays, then I do strongly suggest leaving a like on the video. It helps this type of content reach a wider audience. As always, if you like this content but are not yet subscribed, I do encourage you to hit the subscribe button with bell notification so that you can be alerted when new videos are released.